Do you guys remember the time when David Bowie used his 8-foot humanoid cat planted inside his adopted son in order to blow up a group of high schoolers and the world's edgiest man? If not, then welcome to JoJo. I'll let you into a little secret. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is bizarre. I know, shocking, I couldn't believe it either. But the weirdest of the bunch, in my opinion, would be part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. And that's what makes it so good. Diamond is Unbreakable is home to my personal favourite villain, story arc and stand in the entire anime. Well, so far at least. Kira Yoshikage and Bites the Dust make for one of the most interesting and engaging story arcs in all of JoJo. It's short but sweet, 10 chapters and 2 episodes of masterclass writing, and with that being said, let's begin. Now let's begin with the stand ability itself, Killer Queen's third bomb, Bites the Dust, which I believe fits nicely between not being too simple where it becomes uninteresting, but also not too complex where it becomes overly convoluted and hard to understand. It finds a nice middle ground, a sweet spot that makes it work so well. And also, unlike the other final villain stands, it's not absurdly overpowered like the Wild, King Crimson or D4C. Sure, it can be overpowered, but it's much more situational than any other stand in the series. This ability allows Kira to choose a vessel for the bomb's activation, and if said vessel unveils Kira's identity at any point, the bomb is triggered and those who learnt of his identity are instantly killed. Upon the bomb's activation, time is then reset 1 hour into the past, with the catch being everything that happened is now set in fate, with Kira being none the wiser. Let's put this into the scenario that occurs during the arc. Hayato acts as the vessel for Bites the Dust, and when Rohan learns of Kira's identity when using Heaven's Door on Hayato, the trigger for the bomb is activated, killing Rohan in the process. Time goes back 1 hour, with the only exception being that Rohan's death is now absolute. It is fated to happen from now on, unless the ability is undone. And this rule isn't limited to just death. Any actions taken prior to the jump back in time are now destined to happen, such as the breaking of the teapot and Rohan using Heaven's Door on Hayato. So with that basic description of the stand's ability, what makes Bites the Dust so great? Well, first of all, it serves as a reflection of Kira as a character, much more than you might think. Particularly in regards to the stand's main weakness, the fact that the user does not know what happened in the hour in which the vessel for Bites the Dust just came back in time from, or even if the vessel has come back in time in the first place. The fact that Kira doesn't even know the consequences of his own ability highlight his desire to live a quiet life. He doesn't concern himself with the likes of fighting, confrontations and unneeded violence. And this ability strengthens the idea that he doesn't know nor need to know what has happened, because from his perspective, that would hinder his ideals to live a completely peaceful life. We learn early on that a stand is a manifestation of a person's soul, and in the case of Kira Yoshikage and Bites the Dust, this is the most explicit example, where each aspect of the ability links to an aspect of his character. The idea that the whole ability is dependent on manipulating someone else to do the dirty work highlights Kira's selfish and individualistic personality, living in a world where he cares solely about himself. The idea that anyone who finds out his identity is immediately killed obviously highlights his desire to not be caught and live his so-called quiet life where he's not the centre of attention, and the idea that Kira has no recollection as to what happened prior to the jump back in time highlights his desire to live in a world where he leads a peaceful life where conflict doesn't concern him. And that is what I like so much about this stand in particular. It's a much more meticulous reflection of its user over some of the more generic stands throughout the series. Bites the Dust is tailor-made for Kira as a character, so much more than any other relationship between stand and stand user. It just feels right. And with that being said, let's get on to the story arc itself. One of the many reasons why the Bites the Dust arc is so interesting is how for most of it, our protagonist is no longer the JoJo of the part, it is instead Hayato, a non-stand user. He really is the MVP of this part. Equipped with nothing but balls of steel, he manages to unveil Kira's identity and ultimately act as probably the most instrumental non-stand user in the entire series. It's easy to forget the amount of trauma put upon this 10-year-old boy, being forced to witness people dying multiple times as an indirect result of himself. After all, he is the vessel for Bites for Dust, the key to the trigger responsible for the death he's witnessing. It's incredibly powerful how far he's determined to go, even attempting suicide in an effort to stop the ability, but alas, he's once again forced to witness yet more deaths he's indirectly responsible for, whether he likes it or not. It's this sense of dread and despair which is unlike anything else in JoJo. Up until this point, JoJo had always felt like a shonen. No matter what, the protagonist would always be coming out on top. Particularly in Stardust Crusaders. I mean, did anyone really think Jotaro would lose to Dio or any of his countless minions during the entirety of the part? No, of course not. But here on the other hand, we get a brief glimpse of despair where all that Hayato does is completely futile. Oh, you're trying to stop Rohan's death? Well, too bad, kiddo. This is part of fate now, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. Get good, scrub. This sense of dread that nothing you can do can undo this event. It is set in stone, destined to happen. You are completely and utterly powerless. That is what makes this arc so engaging. The juxtaposition between the powerless non-stand user of Hayato and the almost omnipotent nature of Kira with Bites for Dust only serves to highlight how powerful Kira appears. As I said earlier, Bites for Dust is nowhere near as broken as, say, The World or King Crimson. If Josuke was there from the get-go, Kira would be dead straight away since he can't use Killer Queen when Bites for Dust is active. But despite that, how his character is portrayed during this part of the story makes him seem far more powerful than any other major antagonist. As we watch from the perspective of a defenseless child, we see how terrifying he really is when in that state of confidence. He appears truly unbeatable. And funnily enough, that's what results in his undoing. Overconfidence. The Bites for Dust arc ends with Josuke overhearing him blurting out his name, a deeply unlucky demise for the luckiest of characters. In a series like JoJo, where fate and destiny are a recurring motif, it is interesting how a character blessed with incredible luck, I mean part 4 really should have ended right here, meets his end via a series of unlucky events. 1, he infiltrated the one family that had a child clever enough and brave enough to stop him. And 2, his eventual death was ultimately a complete accident. He ran out of luck and definitely paid the price. Not making a point, I just find this idea really interesting. But anyway now, as much as I love this arc, it does have its complications. It's not linear, let's put it that way. So with that being said, let me try and explain some of the stuff I haven't already. Particularly right at the beginning with the stand arrow forcibly stabbing Kira of its own accord, thus resulting in his acquisition of Bites for Dust, which seemingly comes completely out of nowhere. And from a storytelling point of view, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of how this power does literally come out of nowhere, but from the context of JoJo, it does make some amount of sense. The stand arrow actively draws that power for those who have potential, and therefore I believe it will be reasonable to assume that a sudden desperation or need for power, with malicious intent or not, is enough to deem yourself worthy of a stand, a little bit of a helping hand if you will. In Kira's case, he was left a complete emotional wreck, falling into a state of panic and hopelessness. He certainly had the potential, but was clearly not in the right state of mind to utilise it to its full effect. He lacked his usual confidence. And that's exactly why the stand arrow pierced him independently. Originally, it drew out his potential in the form of Killer Queen, and this time it drew out his lost confidence ever since settling into the Kawajiri family, manifesting as Bites for Dust. And we see this straight away. The stress and panic is immediately replaced with literally the most confident man on the planet. TLDR, the stand arrow's purpose is to awaken a dormant part of one's soul when the need arises. Here Kira was in complete desperation to have that confidence and security to continue his quiet life, and it's these emotions that were strong enough to awaken his final dormant ability, Bites for Dust. It's important to consider that stands are dormant. Technically speaking, everyone has a stand. The stand arrow doesn't create said stand, it only awakens it, something I feel a lot of people forget. But anyway now, before I finish up, one of the most widely regarded and interesting points of conjecture regarding Bites for Dust is that it is technically a Requiem stand, like we see at the end of part 5. First of all, Bites for Dust and the 2 Requiem stands are both awakened via a second stab from the stand arrow, which is pretty obvious, but the abilities also share some interesting commonalities. They both involve some level of reality manipulation and a common theme of repetition, with Haruto being forced into repeating the same morning, and Diavolo being forced into repeating his death. But ultimately though, this is a massive stretch and completely non-canon. There's not a lot of evidence backing it up, but even still, I find this quite interesting and I feel like it was important to share this idea. But to finish off, let's come to a conclusion. The Bites the Dust story arc from the end of JoJo Part 4 Diamond is Unbreakable is fantastic. Here, Kira feels more menacing than any other villain in the series. The contrast of Kira's almost divine confidence casting a shadow over the powerless figure that is Haruto is handled incredibly well, and creates a sense of dread unlike anything else in the series. And on top of that, the redemption of Haruto coming back to mark the beginning of the end for Kira is powerful, and not to mention immensely satisfying. The stand itself, Bites the Dust, is simply really cool. It's easily one of the most unique stands in the series, and contrasts nicely with our main stand, Crazy Diamond. Whereas Crazy Diamond can rewind the effect of an action, Bites the Dust works by rewinding the action of an effect. And with that being said, I've explained the brilliance of Bites the Dust, and I'll be back in the next video. See ya!